Hello everyone, my name is Nicky, but I was originally meant to be called Todd, but it just so happened that I couldn't pronounce my name properly. The fact is, I was born with a smile, and I'm not talking about the one that usually comes from emotions. I have something else. This thing is connected to the nerve endings that I pinched during my mother's pregnancy. At first, my face seemed really cute for the doctors and my mother. They all kept saying what a happy and cute baby was born, but in reality, everything was different, and, in fact, because of this, there were not very pleasant situations. I'll tell you about it now. Problem number 1. Like I said, I had to change my name because I couldn't pronounce it. Otherwise, I was just a normal child. Eyes, mouth, ears. When I grew up a little bit, I began to show emotions like a real smile, and it was no different from the one that I already had 24/7. If you haven't figured it out yet, imagine a smiling doll that always has a smiling mouth, regardless of the mood and actions. So this is me. My parents learned to read my emotions in my eyes. When I smiled, my eyes shone, and when I didn't, they were normal. But the worst part is that when I cried, I was like a sad clown. Have you watched the movie Joker? I'm like him, but not crazy. When I started going to school, it was like a test, because the guys there looked at me like I was an idiot. They called me the Joker, by the way. There were some really weird situations when I got picked on by unpleasant guys at school. And here they stand, surrounded by a crowd, calling me names, shouting, throwing insults, and I stand and involuntarily smile. I was always predicted a career as a sad clown, called a loser. Because of my inner complexes, I could not even adequately respond to them. My relatives, neighbors, and friends got used to me, but I couldn't find a place at school until a girl named Rena transferred to us. She was the first to approach me, met me, and immediately began to communicate. I thought that she was looking for an excuse to mock, dig, laugh, and was distrustful, but time passed, and she was still warm to me. Then I timidly went to meet him, and I was not mistaken. Rena was a bright person. She was born in a poor family with many children, and despite this, she treated everything with incredible kindness. Rena was able to withstand any blow from society. I thought that I was the only one who could be bullied, but it turns out that Rena received ridicule from the girls only because she was poor. I thought it was unfair, so I told her, and she said she thought the same of me. There are things and circumstances beyond our control. In this case, we just need to change our attitude to them and then they no longer seem terrible, she said. This girl also often told me that, in fact, I should not be offended by those who offend me, because those people are limited in many ways, including in development. This thought gave me peace and strength. We became friends together and our relationship was also criticized. We were called lovers, but we tried to ignore them. Once, when our teacher came to school again, she decided to hold a lesson in the open air. There were also our wonderful classmates, who did not miss dozens of attempts to call us names. The teacher made a few comments, and then offered to have a breakfast and a picnic. We all happily agreed. Each of us laid out food. Who had what? At first I was embarrassed to eat in front of everyone. I usually didn't, because sometimes the food would fly out of my mouth. I couldn't cover it completely, but that day I knew that sooner or later I would have to do it, especially since my friend was there, and this gave me confidence. I pulled the food container out of my bag as my mother made my favorite club sandwich with ham, sliced fruit, and added juice. Hey, poor people, you don't even have food with you. This is the same freak who always humiliates us with his boys. I looked at Rena, who sat with her head down and said nothing. I gave her my half. She thanked me. Thomas shouted again, pointing at us with his finger. One homeless woman, the other a joker. That's a couple. I took the half-finished juice and poured it on him, and he jumped back in surprise. But he was already all wet. Thomas didn't think twice before he bumped into me. All the children jumped up from their seats. The teacher began to separate us, but nothing helped. We clung to each other like leeches, and no one could stop us. As a result, the teacher shouted that she was calling the principal, and we immediately let each other go. I apologized to the teacher for my behavior and promised to be more restrained. Thomas didn't say a word, just looked at me sideways and gestured that I was finished. Then he suddenly bent down, wanted to drink some water, and suddenly began to choke. We all didn't understand what was going on. We thought he was just messing with us again. The teacher sternly told him to stop acting like this, but he continued. I noticed that his face was blue and ran up, wrapped my arms around the back, and began to press on his stomach. I did a few such manipulations, and grapes popped out of Thomas's mouth. It turns out that the berry fell into his glass when we were fighting and he did not notice it, quickly drank the water, and choked. There was silence. Thomas breathed as if for the first time. It was only after a couple of minutes that he looked at me, at the other people, then silently grabbed his bag and left. Everyone stood in slight shock. Then the teacher told us to pack up and led us back to the classroom. When we got back, Thomas was sitting there alone. It wasn't until the next break that he came up to me and thanked me. It was awkward for him to overstep his pride, but he did it. To be honest, I was pleased. After this incident, I was respected not only by Tom, but also by the rest of my classmates. Rena and I were invited to parties, invited to have lunch at a common table, and joined our teamwork on subjects. People started seeing a different side of us, and I was happy, just like Rena. Everything turned out as she said. Once you change your attitude to something, everything becomes different. What is happening now? No, my smile did not go away, but I began to treat it differently, from a different angle, to pass it off as a virtue, not a disadvantage, and people now reach for me themselves. My inner qualities, which my friend instilled in me, have been preserved. Kindness and faith in the best are two things that nothing can ever erase. In general, now, my smile is my business card, and I will advise you the same. Once you love yourself, the world around you also changes.
My name is Max, and my uncle is a vampire. I found out about it not so long ago, and to be honest, I was completely blown away. I didn't believe there were such people as vampires before, but that's what happened. Now, I'll tell you about my uncle and how I found out about him. My uncle's name is Ted, and he's my father's twin, but we only met recently. The thing is, my parents met while they were living in North Carolina. They were married there. My dad had a close relationship with his twin brother, Uncle Ted. They played together almost all the time, went to the same class, to the same parties. It was only when they were older that my father began to notice that his health was getting worse and worse. His parents and him couldn't understand what was wrong, what they just did not do, and ran to doctors and psychologists, and even went to psychics. But nothing helped. When they were teenagers, and it was time to meet girls, my dad beat Uncle Ted's records, although they were very similar. For some reason, the girls were more attracted to my father. Uncle Ted would get mad, and at the moment, my father would get sick. He would get sick right away, and he would get terrible pimples, or whatever. It was a mystery my father couldn't solve until something crucial happened in their lives. On one of the failed dates, Uncle Ted came home so upset that he took all of his anger out on my father, and he immediately became ill. Dad said that was when he realized that his brother was his energy vampire, maybe because they're twins, so they have a powerful bond. Who knows? In general, my father left his father's house immediately after the wedding with my mother. My mother didn't understand the rush, and my father didn't really tell me what was going on. He didn't want to tell anyone that he was leaving town just because of his brother. Who would believe that a bad luck streak only follows him when his brother is around? So he decided to go away and try to live without him. And he was amazed. But things really got better. Upon arrival in a new place, Dad was immediately offered a job. They rented a small but super cozy house. They lived well and provided for themselves. Everything was fine, and then my mom got pregnant. The news pleased the family, grandparents. Of course, Uncle Ted found out about it, and of course, they talked with their father, just not so often anymore. Uncle Ted was happy to have a nephew or niece and made a surprise visit for Christmas after what he had heard. He was like snow on the head. My parents absolutely did not expect him, especially my father. They met him with a tight smile and the hope that he had hitchhiked, which they were very much mistaken about. Uncle Ted is a straight man, and he immediately asked where he was going to sleep this week. Mom and Dad were surprised, but they didn't send him away. That night, my father went down to drink water at night, slipped on the floor, and fell, hitting the switch with his foot. The lights went out all over the house. The next day, when the electrician came, my father said that he had had to go to work. Uncle Ted asked to go with him, and they were back in half an hour because Dad spilled coffee on himself. I looked at him, but there was no face on him. I said, "Did he stay up all night?" But Dad said that he was just sleeping and had a good night's sleep. I didn't understand anything, so they left. Uncle Ted was a great uncle, but with his cockroaches. In his opinion, we should support him, but my mother and I did not understand why. Out of respect for my father, we didn't say anything. But when my father came home, he looked even more outdated than in the morning. This went on for another week, and when my father looked more like a dead man, my mother took him to a cafe, where she openly asked what was wrong. When he's around, I dry up. Things are going badly, and in general, I feel bad myself, my father finally said. That same day, my mother packed up his things, politely but urgently asked him to leave the house. She said that she was not ready to receive guests at the moment. He was offended by my father. He left, and they didn't talk for years. My dad missed him a lot, but he knew that their meeting would turn out badly for him, so he chose family and happiness. So the years passed. I was born. I didn't even know Dad had a brother, much less a twin. I grew up and went to school. Everything was going well, until one day I noticed my father in one of the stores. He looked strange. In a not very clean shirt, jeans, he stole food from the market, and a can of beer. I couldn't believe my eyes. How so? I immediately went up to him and told him to put everything back, but he looked at me in surprise and said, "Boy, go for a walk. This is none of your business." I even thought that Dad was cracking up, and then I saw that he was really going to rob the store. I went up behind him and pulled out a beer from under his shirt, and the salesman noticed and called the police. We were taken to the police station. There I sat and argued that it was my father, and he kept claiming that it was the first time he'd ever seen me. Then I asked him to call my mother, and then both my parents came in. "Wait a minute," I said, pausing for a moment. "Hi, Ted. I see you've already met my son," Dad said to the man next to me. Only then did I learn of its existence. My father bailed him out and brought him home. They had a long conversation there. We found out that Uncle Ted wasn't living very well, that he didn't have a job or a family, and that his whole life had gone downhill after he and his mother had kicked him out of the house. I suddenly felt so sorry for him that I didn't even know how to help, even though I wanted to do it madly. Uncle Ted looked at my mother and me, the house, and the dog, and said he was so happy for my brother. Then he burst into tears. "Why did you do this to me? You're my only native person. What have I done to you?" he asked my father. I saw my father blush with shame. After a short pause, he finally admitted what the reason was. Then he heard Uncle Ted's wild laugh. He said that all his life he thought the opposite, that the vampire was my father, and that's why he's not doing well. Who even came up with this energy vampire? I asked myself. He stayed with us that day. He and Father talked until morning. We found out that my uncle really had a difficult life. After leaving our house, he went to look for a job, but he was not accepted anywhere as a security guard or a dishwasher. He was sure it was his brother's anger. "I was also offended by you all these years, but I couldn't help it. You sent me away," he told his brother. And then they tried living together, and you know what? They both turned out to be like that. This time, my mother and I tested it for ourselves. After communicating with him, it immediately seems that the life has been sucked out of you. In fact, this terrible wild feeling of fatigue almost knocks you down. So my mother and I decided to communicate with them separately. But for now, let them drink each other's blood.